When I was younger, I played t-ball, and my dad, who's the pastor of the church where I come from, he was my head coach. And I've got a picture here of that. That's me with the beautiful throwing form there, and then that's Dad behind me. I was, played for the Braves, and I remember feeling so epic, like I was the hero as I walked out to this plate. I'm gonna knock this ball out of the park, but in reality, I would just swing the bat and it would kind of roll off the tee. I wasn't anything great. And looking back now, I don't think you're the star of the t-ball team when you spend most of your time in the dugout or in the outfield, because they don't ever go that far in t-ball. I don't think I even had one come my way, and if I did, I probably blocked those memories out because I'm too embarrassed or whatever. And baseball just must not run in the Canary boys' blood because my younger brother Trey, he played catcher in t-ball. And just think about that for a second. There is no ball to catch. So he stood behind the plate, kind of crouched down. He would talk to people as they were batting, and kind of was the entertainment for the crowd. Would turn around and he would dance sometimes, or he'd hit his butt because he thought it was funny, or things like that. So baseball must just not be in our blood. And I don't think Trey and I contributed as much as we remember contributing to these teams. But however, my team, we were the champs. Trey was younger than me, so he didn't play the same time, but we probably would have beat him too. We were the champs of the T-ball league. We won everything. So even though I wasn't necessarily the hero of the team, I was still on the winning team. Oftentimes, I feel that we do the same. We look at these Bible stories, and instead of reading and seeing what these heroes of God have fought for and bled for and died for, we tend to make the stories more about ourselves and make ourselves out to be the heroes of the story. But that is not what these stories are meant for, because God is always the hero, and Jesus is the one the story is always pointing toward. And you may have heard that you just got to be like David. You have to go slay those giants in your life, but we are much more like the Israelites than David in that story. Jesus, in fact, is the better David. He is the hero, and he is the one that saves us. I say this because we have to be careful when we read stories like the story we're going to read today. To not assume that we are the heroes when the story is really trying to teach us how we are much more like those who disobey God than the ones who are the heroes. But today we're going to be going over one of my favorite stories in the Bible, the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. However, I'm going to refer to them as Rack, Shack, and Benny because those are very long names, and I often will say like Rack, Shack, and mix them up, and then I get confused. But and also, those are also the names I learned thanks to VeggieTales when I was young. So Rack, Shack, and Benny is what I'll call them outside of the text to help it flow. But before we begin, we need to actually establish some background information. Our story begins, before we even get to them, we start in 2 Kings 24. We're not going to go there necessarily, but that is where our timeline is. That's kind of where we start. So the Babylonians have just raided the city of Jerusalem and its temple, and they've taken a wave of Israelites into custody. And among these Israelites that were taken, are 4 men that were from the royal family of David. The first being Daniel, yes, the one from the lion's den, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Don't get too confused because these are the same guys, but these are their Jewish names. These are their names that honored God. And so when they were captured by Babylon, the chief official of Babylon changes their names so they will hopefully forget who God is, forget where they come from, forget their traditions. And these new names honor Babylonian gods rather than our God. Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego, Rack, Shack, and Benny. All 4 of them, however, get recruited to work in the royal palace of Babylon. And long story short, they stick to their guns, they follow God's rules rather than the kingdoms, and God blesses them for it. King Nebuchadnezzar actually raises their status, and they become quite important in this city of Babylon. Daniel actually interprets a dream for the king where he claims that one day Babylon and all these other kingdoms that will come after will fall, with God's kingdom coming and humbling all of them. Now, ironically, the imagery in this dream of kingdoms falling is of a statue, and this statue gets destroyed. But King Nebuchadnezzar must have just really liked this idea because he decided to build a giant gold statue to worship. I don't see why he would do that after he just saw it get destroyed in a dream, but that's what he goes with. And it was actually about 9 feet wide. So if I was like to lay down, I'm about 6'4". So me and like another half of me would be how wide it is. And then it's about 100 feet tall, which is 10 stories. So it's very impressive for that long ago to build a structure that big, especially all made out of gold. So it's also very expensive to do, more than likely, but he is the king. So we're going to pick up right here in Daniel 3, where we begin. Daniel 3, verses 4 through 7. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be immediately thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and all peoples of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, think about that for a second. It's a furnace big enough that a human, actually multiple humans, could be thrown into. And I couldn't even really wrap my mind around that. So I researched it a bit, and I found this is what most scholars believe the furnace may have looked like. It was something similar to this. This is a large limestone kiln. And so up top, there may have been some kind of opening, like a pit, where they could throw things in, because if the furnace is going, you're not going to be able to walk in to stoke the fire or throw more wood in. You need an opening. So they would have more than likely thrown things in from the top, and we see later in the story that people actually fell in. So it would make sense. They believe it's this build, and that opening in the front would be for the king to look through to see if the fire's going, that kind of thing. Regardless of how it was built, the furnace instilled fear in everyone. I think the people being given this ultimatum just think death or worship this statue. And then they instantly think, okay, I'm about to worship because I don't want to die to this, and not just die by burning to death. And I guarantee there were others who thought, well, I'll just fall down, I'll act like I'm worshiping. They won't know the difference. There's no way they could know. I'll just act like I'm worshiping. Or even maybe they were like, well, I'll just pray to God. I'll pray to God while I do this, and no one will know the difference. I've tricked them. I don't have to die, and I can still praise God. And I feel like if that was me in this situation today, I probably would have done the same thing. I wouldn't want to get thrown into a blazing furnace, so I would act like I was, worshiping, but in reality, I'm praying to God, like, God, like, help me out here. And I want to ask you the same question. What do you think you would have done in this situation? You're looking around, and you see that it's everyone around you is bowing, is on the ground. You are the only person standing up. Your friends, your family, they're at least acting like they're following these orders. And we may think, well, there's no reason to even wonder this because it doesn't happen anymore. And it's not necessarily true, because have you seen what's happening in Afghanistan right now? It's the same thing. People are being told if they don't convert, they're going to be killed. Stuff like this still happens today. But we'll touch more on that later. I'd like to move along to verse 10, which says, "Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your Majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. Now, this is, to say, the real oh crap moment. It's the oh no, what's going to happen? Because if you don't know who King Nebuchadnezzar is, just know that this guy does not play around. King Nebuchadnezzar is often described as the greatest military leader of the Babylonian Empire. So dude is like drill sergeant, who's also the president of the country. He has all the power over everything. He's not a very nice guy. Obviously, it's a pagan country as well. So think about even just how scared you've ever been to go talk to someone. Maybe it was a parent after they found out something that you did, or maybe it was a school principal. Now or back in the day, you were sitting there and then over the intercom or someone comes in your classroom and is like, hey, you need to go to the principal's office, and you have no idea what it's for. That's a scary moment. Or maybe even it was a significant other, a difficult conversation you needed to have. Regardless of what it was, I'm sure that Rakshak and Benny were much more nervous for what's about to happen. Because when we are faithful, everyone notices. Rakshak and Benny were the only three standing in this huge crowd of people. And now we're going to see the first reason we still talk about this story today. Verse 14. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Now, pay attention to this because Nebuchadnezzar is giving these men a second chance. Whether it be because they're, high up in his kingdom or he knows who they are, whatever, he's giving them a second chance. But this second chance is equivalent today to someone holding a gun to your head and saying, hey, if you don't do what I'm asking you to do, death is imminent. And Nebuchadnezzar is almost even bragging, if you look at the end, showing off his power when he says, then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? He's comparing himself. He's not just a king. He's saying, I have all the power. I am the Most High. What can you do? I am in control. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Now, we need to focus on what's key here in these verses, that Rakshak and Benny have not only now just disregarded direct orders from the leader of the kingdom they live in, who is also their boss. Don't forget about that. They have now told him, we will not serve your gods. Our God will deliver us. And my favorite part, however, is in verse 18, and especially how the NLT, the New Living Translation version, words how they respond. It says, but even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. We want to make it clear to you. They are not sugarcoating. They are not telling him like, well, I mean, it's our religion, sir, and if you could help us out this one time. They're not doing that. They're saying, we're making this clear. We will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. And this is the kind of situation we love to picture ourselves in as the heroes of the story. We like to think that we would react the same way, that we would have the epic comeback to be able to say, be the cool guy and think of that in the spot. And in reality, probably not. We often struggle, I feel like, when we try to think of something to say in the moment. And we always think later like, oh, that's what I should have said. But would we react the same way? That's what's important. In reality, we would have likely failed at the first step. Even if by some miracle I had gotten to where they are now, Pretty sure I would have peed my pants from how scared I could have been, because at this point, think about it, that furnace is nearby. You can feel the heat from this. You can see the fire. There's no way he has it, super far away from all this. He's trying to threaten these people to bow down. So they can see what happens if they disregard these orders. Verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Did you notice that there? The men just placing these 3 in the furnace died from being near the fire, from how hot it was. And I did a little research on this as well. And for a fire to be able to kill someone just from standing nearby, it would be inhaling the how hot the air is. It would burn your lungs, and your esophagus is 1,100 degrees. So this fire is a minimum of 1,100 degrees. And obviously, if we look, it says that he heated the furnace 7 times hotter than normal. So if you do some quick math, if the furnace is 200 degrees normally, which there's no way it was, 200 degrees, that is 1,400 degrees. So this furnace is way hotter than the minimum. I like to think it was probably around 500 minimum, just normally. And if you do the math there, that is 3,500 degrees right now. So it's hot. That is the main thing. I'm sure people are sweating just being nearby. Verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Well, certainly, Your Majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound, unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was there a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Have you ever been to a bonfire? Just being outside near that fire makes you smell like fire. You're going to go somewhere else later and be like, "Oh, were you having s'mores?" Because you smell like smoke. These guys were literally inside of a fire, and they have no trace of any of that. Verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God." I just love even how quickly King Nebuchadnezzar starts realizing that he or even his gods are inferior, because he throws them in the fire. And then literally 2 verses later, in verse 26, he starts acknowledging their God, because he says, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God." He has now moved himself down a few pegs. He is no longer what God can take you from this fire and save you, or even his own gods. He has placed their God, just from seeing these men at the number 1 spot. And there's an important thing that I haven't touched on yet, that there's a 4th man in this fire, and you guys might be like, "Why is he not talking about that? He's talking about all these other things." There's a 4th guy randomly in this fire that King Nebuchadnezzar refers to as a son of the gods. Now, many scholars are obviously unsure if that 4th person was Jesus or not, But at the same time, it very well could have been Jesus. But what we have to understand, that part doesn't matter. It's that whoever was in the fiery furnace was there by God's decree, was there by God's power to save his servants that were faithful to him. And it's truly an incredible story. It's one that we can pull so many truths from. And that's what I would like to do with the time we have remaining today. I'd like to point out 3 truths we can apply to our lives. Number 1, faith in the midst of opposition draws attention to God. And that one's a longer one, so I want to say it again. Faith in the midst of opposition draws attention to God. When we have radical faith, it only draws glory to God. Everyone may be against you, and yes, that does make it difficult to have faith. But through it all, God is still standing with us. Number 2, faith allows us to be a part of miracles. My dad always says, don't miss the miracle. It may not be something as crazy as walking on water or being thrown into a blazing furnace and coming out unharmed. But if we're only looking for crazy miracles such as these, we're going to miss these miracles that God has placed right in front of our eyes. It requires obedience. Number 3, faith is more than just belief. Oswald Chambers in Run Today's Race says this: faith for my deliverance is not faith in God. Faith means whether I am visibly delivered or not, I will stick to my belief that God is love. There are some things only learned in a fiery furnace. The argument I feel we often see is that I believe in Jesus, that's all there is to it. But in James 2:19 we can read, you believe that there is one God? Good. Even the demons believe that, and they shudder. Just believing is not enough. In James 2:14 through 17 we read, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food, and if one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego weren't just special because they showed their faith by the things they did. And I think a major issue that we face today is how we show our faith, the way we show it, or even the lack of the way we show our faith. Whether it be that we are cursing a ton outside of church, or out of church, or we're given in to pornographic desires, or even just not being a good person or friend to others. Our deeds don't match up to who God calls us to be. When we claim to follow Jesus, on top of all these things we're not showing our faith by, we not only hurt ourselves, but we hurt the church as a whole. As we have touched on already with all the persecution happening in Afghanistan, we are literally seeing history repeat itself. An evil leader or group takes over and captures people from their homeland, attempts to force them to convert, and when they don't do so, they kill them. The story we read about in the Bible isn't just a fantasy. As we can see now, stuff like this still happens today. These believers, these people in Afghanistan, however, are standing up for what they believe in. They're showing their faith, even if they might die in a week. They believe, they say, like in verse 18 of Daniel 3, but even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you've set up. We must stand up for what we believe in. And our faith needs to be solely in God. When we stand in that fire, no matter what our fires may be, no matter what they may look like, we can draw comfort in knowing that we are not alone. Earlier in the service, it was the first time I think we sang it here, we sang a song called Another in the Fire. And I've always thought of the story we read of today, obviously, because it's the song, the story is what the song is based on. It's based on this story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And in case you missed it, I would just like to read over those main lyrics again that say, "There's a grace where the heart is under fire. Another way when the walls are closing in. And when I look at the space between where I used to be and this reckoning, I know I will never be alone. There was another in the fire, standing next to me. There was another in the waters, holding back the seas. And should I ever need reminding of how I've been set free, there is a cross that bears the burden where another died for me. There is another in the fire." Whenever we are faced with difficult choices, and whenever we find ourselves having to stand alone, whenever we feel like all is lost, or we need to remember that there's another in the fire. There is one who will never leave us or forsake us. Jesus is forever. He's always standing with us when our faith is under fire. We just need to stand strong, be obedient, and trust him when no one else is. Let's pray.